The history of U.S. elections is rich, reflecting the evolving nature of democracy in America, from the first election in 1789 to the present. The election process, its rules, and voter participation have changed significantly over the centuries. Below is a historical overview followed by 77 facts about U.S. elections. Overview of U.S. election history. 1. 1789-1797, the first U.S. presidential election took place in 1789, and George Washington was unanimously elected. 1. Only white male landowners could vote, and the system was heavily biased toward elites. 2. 1800, the election between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams led to the first peaceful transfer of power between political parties, marking the start of the U.S.'s long tradition of peaceful transitions. 3. 1824, the controversial election of John Quincy Adams, despite Andrew Jackson winning the popular vote, prompted changes, moving toward broader voting rights for white men and weakening the influence of elites. 4. 1860, the election of Abraham Lincoln, amid the tensions over slavery, led directly to the Civil War. 4. Lincoln won the election on an anti-slavery platform without carrying a single Southern state. 5. 1870, the 15th Amendment guaranteed African American men the right to vote, though discriminatory practices like literacy tests and poll taxes limited their participation for nearly a century. 6. 1920, with the passage of the 19th Amendment, women were granted the right to vote, expanding the electorate significantly. 7. 1965, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 aimed to eliminate racial discrimination in voting, particularly targeting Southern states that had used tactics like literacy tests to disenfranchise African American voters. 8. 2000, the contested election between George W. Bush and Al Gore was decided by the Supreme Court due to issues with ballot counting in Florida, highlighting the importance of the Electoral College and the intricacies of the U.S. election system. 77 facts about U.S. elections. 110, presidential elections. 1. The first U.S. presidential election took place in 1789, with only 10 of the 13 states participating. 2. George Washington is the only president to have been elected unanimously. 3. The Electoral College system has been used since the first presidential election in 1789, but it has been criticized for not always reflecting the popular vote. 4. A candidate needs 270 electoral votes to win the presidency out of 538. 5. Franklin D. Roosevelt is the only U.S. president to have served more than 2 terms, winning 4 elections, 1932, 1936, 1940, and 1944. 6. The 22nd Amendment, 1951, limits U.S. presidents to 2 terms in office. 7. Andrew Jackson won the popular vote in 1824, but lost the presidency in a contested electoral outcome. 8. Theodore Roosevelt ran as a third-party candidate in 1912, under the Progressive, Bull Moose Party, and secured more votes than the Republican incumbent, William Taft. 9. The youngest president elected was John F. Kennedy at age 43. 10. The oldest president elected is Joe Biden, who was 78 years old when he assumed office in 2021. 1120. Voting rights and participation. 1. In the early 1800s, only white male property owners were eligible to vote. 2. The 15th Amendment, 1870, granted African American men the right to vote, though actual enfranchisement came much later due to Jim Crow laws. 3. The 19th Amendment, 1920, granted women the right to vote after decades of advocacy from suffragettes. 4. The 26th Amendment, 1971, lowered the voting age from 21 to 18, largely in response to protests over the Vietnam War. 5. Voter turnout in U.S. presidential elections typically ranges from 50% to 60% of eligible voters. 6. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 banned discriminatory practices like literacy tests that were used to suppress minority voting. 7. Native Americans were not guaranteed the right to vote in every state until the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. 8. Convicted felons in many states lose their right to vote, though some states restore voting rights after completion of sentences. 9. The U.S. has a tradition of voter registration, whereas in some countries, citizens are automatically registered to vote. 10. The practice of voter suppression remains controversial, with modern accusations of gerrymandering and voter ID laws limiting access to the ballot. 2130. Electoral College. 1. The Electoral College was created as a compromise between electing the president by Congress and by popular vote. 2. 5 U.S. presidential elections have been decided in favor of a candidate who did not win the popular vote, e.g., 2000 and 2016. 3. Each state is allocated a number of electors based on its representation in Congress, 2 senators plus the number of representatives. 4. Maine and Nebraska are the only states that split their electoral votes based on congressional district outcomes. 5. The Electoral College originally allowed the runner-up in electoral votes to become vice president, but this changed with the 12th Amendment, 1804. 6. If no presidential candidate receives a majority in the Electoral College, the House of Representatives elects the president. 7. In 1824, John Quincy Adams was elected president by the House of Representatives after no candidate received a majority in the Electoral College. 8. Faithless electors, or electors who vote against their state's popular vote, have occurred in history but rarely impact the outcome. 9. The Electoral College system amplifies the importance of swing states, where the outcome is uncertain. 10. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact seeks to change the system by ensuring the president is elected by a national popular vote, but it has not yet been enacted. 3140. Political parties. 1. The U.S. began with no formal political parties, but by the 1790s, 2 parties emerged, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. 2. The modern Democratic Party traces its roots to Andrew Jackson and the Democratic Republicans of the 1820s. 3. The Republican Party was founded in 1854 by anti-slavery activists and gained prominence with Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860. 4. The Whig Party was a major political force in the 1830s and 1840s, but dissolved in the 1850s, partly over divisions about slavery. 5. The two-party system dominates U.S. politics, though third-party candidates occasionally have a significant influence, e.g., Ross Perot in 1992. 6. Third-party candidates rarely win elections but can influence major parties to adopt new policies. 7. The Green Party and Libertarian Party are 2 of the most well-known third parties in the U.S. 8. Primaries and caucuses are the 2 main methods of nominating presidential candidates. 9. The Tea Party movement within the Republican Party emerged in 2009, advocating for smaller government and fiscal conservatism. 10. The U.S. political landscape has seen periods of realignment, where major voter bases shift between parties, e.g., the New Deal coalition of the 1930s. 4150. Voting systems and procedures. 1. The secret ballot was adopted in the U.S. in the late 19th century, replacing earlier systems where votes were cast publicly. 2. Absentee voting allows voters to cast ballots by mail if they cannot make it to polling places on election day. 3. Early voting has become more common in recent elections, allowing voters to cast ballots before election day. 4. Vote-by-mail systems have been used in some states, like Oregon and Washington, for several years and became more widespread during the COVID-19 pandemic. 5. Provisional ballots are used when a voter's eligibility is in question. They are counted once eligibility is confirmed. 6. Voting machines were first used in the U.S. in 1892 in New York, but paper ballots are still widely used. 7. Gerrymandering is the process of drawing congressional districts to favor one political party, a practice that has existed for over 200 years. 8. Voter ID laws are a contentious issue, with supporters arguing they prevent fraud and opponents saying they disenfranchise certain voters. 9. Election Day in the U.S. is always the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, a tradition that dates back to the 19th century. 10. Some states allow same-day voter registration, while others require registration weeks before the election. 5160. Campaigns and media. 1. The first televised presidential debate was in 1960 between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. 2. The use of social media in elections became prominent in 2008 during Barack Obama's campaign. 3. Political ads have been a major part of U.S. campaigns since the early 20th century, and spending on ads has skyrocketed in 2020 presidential election. For example, over $14 billion was spent on campaigns, with a significant portion allocated to advertising.